The ambient temperature in the Stavehold Colonial Administration office was maintained at a constant 20 degrees. It was a sterile, unforgiving climate designed to keep clerks awake. But Tamsin Vale, the civilian commander and a former rapid response tactical officer, found comfort in the chill. It reminded her of the environmental controls on military dropships. It reminded her of the rigid order that existed before chaos inevitably broke loose. Today, the chaos did not announce itself with proximity sirens or orbital bombardments. It arrived quietly, masquerading as a routine administrative update on her secure terminal. The digital document was perfectly formatted, bearing the elegant, geometric seals of the Oryx Dominion. An Oryx survey vessel, the symmetry of thought, had docked at Stavehold for routine refueling operations over the past 48 hours. The vessel had departed exactly 12 minutes ago. The attached summary report was filed retroactively, a severe breach of protocol. But the title of the document was what made Tamsin's heart skip a single, vital beat. Declaration of Emergency Educational Transfer. Tamsin leaned forward, the pale blue light of the holographic display reflecting in her dark eyes. She bypassed the standard diplomatic greeting and scrolled directly to the manifest. Subject count 52. Demographic range 5 to 13 standard Earth years. The bureaucratic phrasing was impeccably polite, utterly devoid of malice, which only magnified the underlying horror. These were not adult colonists signing up for an interstellar exchange program. These were children. 52 children belonging to the miners, the life support engineers, and the administrators of Stavehold. Tamsin's military training kicked in, an iron door slamming shut over her rising maternal panic. She did not gasp. She did not tremble. She systematically opened the appended roster. She scanned the names, reading each line with the cold, detached precision of a sniper acquiring targets. Miller, Elias, age 7, Chen, Bao, age 12, Adebayo, Nia, age 5. Then, halfway down the glowing column of text, the smooth scrolling stopped. Vale, Juniper, age 10. Attached to her daughter's name was a single, clinical annotation. Exhibits anomalous, resonant feedback. Prime candidate. The air in the office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Tamsin stared at the letters forming her daughter's name. Juniper. Just this morning, they had argued about whether 10 was old enough to walk to the hydroponics bay alone. Tamsin had tied the laces of Juniper's boots because the girl was too impatient to do it herself. Now, Juniper was a data point on an alien manifest. Tamsin did not allow the mother inside her to scream. If she screamed, she would shatter, and a shattered woman could not hunt. Instead, the civilian administrator vanished, replaced instantly by the operative who had once pacified the Outer Rim insurgencies. She initiated a system-wide lockdown of the administrative sector and accessed the station's internal surveillance network. She needed to see the breach. She needed to see the violence, the Oryx shock troops storming the schools, the panic of the teachers. What she saw was infinitely worse. She pulled the camera feed from the primary educational concourse at 0800 hours. The 52 children were scattered across various classrooms and recreation areas. Then, precisely at 0815, they stopped. There was no visible or audible trigger. No Oryx soldiers breached the corridors. No alarms blared. Every single child on the list simply ceased their activities. They dropped their toys, set down their digital styluses, and turned their heads toward the eastern docking rings. In perfect, terrifying synchronization, they began to walk. They moved past their teachers, ignoring the frantic questions and the hands trying to hold them back. They slipped out of doorways and merged into a single procession in the main promenade. Their faces were blank, their eyes fixed forward, marching toward Docking Bay 4 as if drawn by an invisible, unbreakable tether. Tamsin cross-referenced the surveillance feeds with the station's medical logs. Over the past 72 hours, A strange anomaly had been recorded in the pediatric ward. All 52 of these specific children had been brought in by confused parents because the children had been obsessively drawing the exact same shape. Tamsin pulled up Juniper's personal data slate from the network backup. There it was. A spiral. It was not a chaotic scribble, but a complex, mathematically perfect fractal spiral, rendered in a glowing luminescent yellow. No one had taught them this. None of the children had communicated with each other about it. It was as if the symbol had been broadcast directly into their developing brains. She closed the image. She could not afford the distraction of the spiral right now. She returned to the Oryx document. The most terrifying aspect of the abduction was the legality of it. The Oryx Dominion had not declared war. They had exploited a centuries-old, widely ignored clause in the Pan-Galactic Treaty regarding the mutual preservation of unique biological phenomena. They had filed the correct permits. They had provided the requisite digital signatures. At the very bottom of the document, etched in cold, unfeeling standard translation, was a single message. The subjects will be returned post-observation. Compensation for temporary emotional distress has been deposited into the colonial treasury. They had paid a fee. They had left a receipt for 52 human children. Tamsin stood up. Her ergonomic chair rolled back and hit the reinforced wall with a sharp crack. She opened a deeply encrypted, restricted access communication channel. She needed 2 people. Only 2. The first connection established a link to the command deck of the Solarian Vanguard fleet. The holographic visage of Admiral Brensol flickered into existence. His uniform was immaculate, his expression carved from granite. He did not ask how her day was going. "Admiral," Tamsin said, her voice entirely flat, stripped of all inflection. "An Oryx survey vessel just departed my station. They took 52 children. My daughter is on the ship. The Oryx claim it is an educational transfer." Brensol's eyes narrowed slightly, the only outward sign that he had processed the magnitude of the statement. He did not ask for proof. He did not mention the diplomatic complications of engaging an Oryx vessel. He knew Tamsin Vale, and he knew what it meant when a human child was taken. "I require immediate authorization to repurpose station defense assets and requisition available military tracking craft," Tamsin stated. "You have authorization," Bren replied. The channel cut out. 3 words. A blank check for war. Tamsin immediately opened the second channel. This one bounced through 14 proxy servers, routed through dead satellites and unregistered communication buoys before connecting to a terminal that officially did not exist. The screen remained dark. No face appeared. "Kale," Tamsin said to the darkness. Her younger brother worked for a division of human intelligence that had no acronym, no budget on paper, and no oversight. They were the ghosts who solved problems the diplomats pretended were not there. "I saw the Stavehold manifest," Kale's voice echoed through the speakers, distorted and unnaturally calm. "I saw Juniper's name. I am leaving the station in 5 minutes. I need trajectories. I need their deep space network cracked. I need to know where they are taking them." "I have already started," Kale said. The connection severed. Tamsin detached her service sidearm from the biometric lockbox beneath her desk, securing it to her hip. She grabbed her emergency tactical coat and walked out of the office. The corridors of Stavehold Administration were beginning to buzz with the first waves of localized panic. Staff members were running. Data pads were dropping. But Tamsin moved through them like a phantom, completely detached from the noise. As she stepped onto the transport tram leading to the hangar bays, the public interstellar news network monitors lining the walls suddenly flared red with a breaking broadcast. An official representative of the Oryx Dominion, a tall, multi-limbed figure draped in ceremonial metallic silks, was speaking from their capital world. The translation software broadcast the words in a smooth, emotionless tone across the station. The Oryx Dominion announces a successful initial acquisition phase of our new knowledge preservation program. We have identified and secured special biological assets from the Terran outer colonies. These assets possess unique cognitive architectures essential for an upcoming historical archiving project. We assure the galactic community that these assets are being maintained in optimal conditions. Tamsin watched the screen, her face a mask of absolute zero. The broadcast did not cause outrage among the stars. It caused terror. Not terror of the Oryx, but terror of what was about to happen to them. On the live stellar traffic maps displayed next to the newsfeed, a phenomenon was occurring. It was happening in real time. Dozens of icons representing merchant fleets, diplomatic convoys, and even heavily armed mercenary vessels belonging to various alien species were suddenly altering their courses. Civilizations that had spent centuries navigating the complex web of galactic politics were making instantaneous, unilateral decisions. They were violently pivoting their ships away from Oryx space. They were canceling trade agreements, aborting diplomatic missions, and fleeing the sector. The rest of the galaxy had read the same broadcast. They knew exactly what the Oryx had done, and more importantly, they knew what humanity was. The Oryx thought they had exploited a legal loophole. The rest of the galaxy knew that the Oryx had just signed their own death warrant, and nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius when the humans came to collect their young. Tamsin stepped off the tram and walked toward her requisitioned interceptor. The paperwork was filed, the forms were signed, everything was perfectly normal on paper. But as Tamsin strapped herself into the pilot seat, the universe held its breath, waiting for the silence of humanity to break. The slipstream drive of Tamsin's requisitioned interceptor whined as it punctured the dimensional membrane, leaving the Stavehold colony far behind. Inside the cramped cockpit, however, the universe was screaming. Her communications dashboard, usually a quiet stream of navigational telemetry and local traffic control, had transformed into a blinding cascade of interstellar panic. The diplomatic channels were choking on their own bandwidth. The Oral conquered, humanity's oldest and most steadfast allies, did not wait for an official inquiry. Exactly 14 seconds after the Oryx Dominion broadcast their polite kidnapping notice, the Oral High Council severed every diplomatic tether they held with the Dominion. The notification flared across Tamsin's screen in sharp, violent crimson. They enacted an immediate, unconditional embargo. Following the embargo came a localized broadcast ordering every single Oral merchant, tourist, and diplomat to evacuate Oryx space. The Oral did not offer an explanation to the galactic community. They simply ran, pulling their people out of the blast zone of a detonation they knew was inevitable. Then came the Thren Compact. The Thren were a heavily armored, deeply militaristic species that maintained a strict, icy neutrality with the rest of the cosmos. 70 standard years ago, they had made the catastrophic error of declaring a border war against a nascent human colony. It was a war the Thren did not like to record in their history books. Now, on every open unencrypted frequency, available across 4 spiral arms, the Thren Military High Command transmitted a single, unadorned sentence in rudimentary standard text. Return the children. Now. There was no diplomatic preamble. There was no threat attached, because the Thren knew perfectly well that they were not the ones the Oryx needed to fear. The transmission was not a demand made on behalf of humanity. It was a desperate plea to an arrogant neighbor to put out a fire before it burned down the entire forest. Tamsin ignored the flashing alerts. Her hands moved swiftly over the haptic controls, stabilizing her flight path toward the designated rendezvous coordinates. A chime echoed in the cockpit. A deep encryption data packet bypassed her external firewalls, slipping through the interceptor's defense grid as easily as a shadow. Kale. The decryption key was a biometric sequence tied to her retinal scan and a localized pulse from her neural implant. The file unpacked itself, flooding her secondary monitors with architectural schematics, intercepted orbital telemetry, and deeply classified archaeological records. The Oryx had not taken the 52 subjects to a military black site, nor a conventional educational facility. The trajectory plotted by her brother terminated at Elir, a dead, tidally locked moon orbiting a gas giant on the fringes of Oryx space. Tamsin scrolled through the attached files. Elir was not a colony. It was an excavation site. Buried beneath the regolith of the lifeless moon was a megastructure predating modern galactic civilization by millions of years. The Oryx documentation referred to it by a translated moniker, the Lullaby Engine. It was a colossal, subterranean architecture of crystal and dark matter wiring, perfectly preserved but completely dormant. According to the stolen research logs, the Dominion's finest scientific minds had spent 2 decades trying to activate the artifact. Every attempt had failed. The engine did not respond to mechanical stimulation, energy surges, or quantum decoding. The archaeological records, recently deciphered from the ruins surrounding the engine, revealed the missing key. The machine was designed to interface solely with an unfixed consciousness. It required a biological mind that was still growing, still highly malleable, and deeply resonant with emotional frequencies rather than rigid logic. It required a child, but not just any child. The Oryx had discovered that human cognitive architecture possessed a terrifyingly rare evolutionary trait. Human children, before their neural pathways calcified into adult rigidity, could intuitively perceive living mathematical structures. They could hear the invisible, complex equations holding the universe together as if it were a melody. The Dominion believed that by plugging these specific 52 human minds into the Lullaby Engine, they could finally awaken the dormant technology and harvest the pre-human knowledge locked within. They viewed the children as living skeleton keys. On the primary monitor, the interstellar news networks were reaching a fever pitch. A prominent alien journalist, his skin flushed with the violet hues of deep anxiety, looked directly into the camera from a central broadcasting hub. The question that currently paralyzes the galactic exchange is not whether the Oryx Dominion has violated the Pan-Galactic Treaty, the journalist stated, his voice trembling slightly. The question is this: if the Oryx refuse to return these biological assets, will the Solarian Vanguard declare war? Tamsin stared at the feed. The sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from the interstellar community was palpable. It was not born from the Oryx's actions, but from the reaction of Earth, or rather, the lack thereof. There was no ultimatum broadcast from the human capital. There were no press conferences featuring outraged politicians. There were no diplomatic envoys dispatched to demand sanctions. The human communication networks had simply gone black. To the younger, more naive civilizations, this silence might have looked like shock or indecision. But to the Oral, to the Thren, and to any species that had ever crossed a line with the bald apes from a high-gravity death world, the silence was deafening. It was a known doctrine. Humans were loud when they wanted to negotiate. They yelled, they threatened, they slammed fists on tables. But when humans went completely silent, it meant the time for talking was over. It meant the gears of a war machine so vast and terrifying were turning with absolute, frictionless precision. The absence of a threat was the guarantee of annihilation. Tamsin switched off the newsfeed. The fear of politicians and pundits was irrelevant to her current operational parameters. She focused entirely on the raw surveillance data Kale had managed to siphon from the Elir moon's internal network. It was a patchwork of fragmented video feeds and corrupted audio files from the holding sectors deep within the archaeological site. The Oryx thought their internal security was flawless. They were wrong. Tamsin ran a highly specialized diagnostic algorithm over the ambient audio tracks of the children's holding area. She was not looking for visual confirmation. Kale had already verified their physical presence. She was hunting for tactical irregularities. The algorithm hit a snag, a recurring spike in the background noise profile. She isolated the audio track from Sector 4, Cell Block B, filtering out the low hum of the alien life support systems and the distant vibrations of the subterranean facility. She amplified the remaining sound by 400%. It was tapping. It was not random, frightened thrashing against a bulkhead. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Tamsin closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Tap. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. She pulled the feeds from the other sectors, running the same isolation protocol. Out of the 52 children, 12 of them were generating the exact same acoustic anomaly. They were located in different holding rooms, completely isolated from one another by soundproofed bulkheads and energy shields. Yet, the tapping was perfectly synchronized. It was a rhythm, a cadence built on a specific, complex time signature. Her breath hitched in her throat, catching sharply against the cold air of the cabin. She knew that rhythm. She had heard it 1,000 times, murmured softly in the dark when nightmares stalked the edges of sleep. It was not a distress code taught by the military. It was not a standard mathematical sequence. It was a lullaby. 12 children, scattered across an alien dungeon, were independently tapping out the exact same human lullaby against the reinforced glass of their cells. They were not screaming for help. They were establishing a communication network under the very noses of their captors. They were mapping the acoustics of the facility. They were testing the resonant frequencies of the walls. They were waiting. Tamsin opened her eyes. The cold, calculating tactical officer merged seamlessly with the terrifying wrath of a mother who had just found her child's footprint in the dark. She recalibrated her engine output, pushing the interceptor past its recommended safety thresholds. The ship screamed in protest as it accelerated. The Oryx Dominion believed they had stolen helpless specimens. They had no idea they had just swallowed a vanguard of 52 Trojan horses, and the human armada was not coming to negotiate a release. They were coming to level the entire system. In the vast, freezing expanse, separating the Solarian territories from the rest of the galactic spiral, the darkness began to fill with an unprecedented concentration of light. Admiral Bren Saul stood on the primary command deck of the dreadnought Retribution. He had issued the general mobilization order exactly 22 minutes after his encrypted conversation with Tamsin Vale. The official Vanguard mandate was categorized as a rapid border deployment, a standard show of overwhelming force designed to compel diplomatic surrender. However, the tactical holomap stretching across the center of the bridge was not displaying a standard military formation. Around the sleek, predatory silhouettes of the Vanguard cruisers and destroyers, a massive, uncoordinated, yet perfectly unified swarm was gathering. Saul watched in quiet awe as the transponder codes flooded the regional registry. There were deep space mining rigs from the outer asteroid belts, their colossal hulls scarred by decades of micrometeorite impacts, burning their engines at maximum capacity. There were massive, blocky agricultural haulers, their captains having summarily dumped thousands of tons of synthetic grain into the void to reduce mass and increase acceleration. There were privately owned medical frigates, independent courier ships, and even luxury orbital yachts retrofitted with makeshift deflector shields. Nobody had drafted them. No central authority had broadcast a conscription notice or demanded their service. When the fragmented news of the Stavehold abductions breached the civilian communication networks, an unspoken, primal consensus had rippled through the human colonies. A freighter captain halfway through a highly lucrative shipping lane simply aborted his route and turned his massive vessel toward the Dominion border. A medical transport diverted entirely from a scheduled planetary supply run. They did not coordinate their jumps. They did not ask for permission. They just moved. To the myriad alien observers analyzing the sudden, massive surge in slipstream wakes, it did not look like a coordinated military retaliation. It looked like the instinctual migration of a planetary superorganism. It was the terrifying manifestation of a species that, Despite all its internal fractures, political squabbles, and historical divisions, possessed a singular, unbreakable biological imperative. When the pack was threatened, every single member bared their teeth. Ahead of this silent tidal wave, the space surrounding the Oryx Dominion was emptying with a speed that defied logistical logic. The bustling interstellar trade hubs, usually choked with multi-species commercial traffic, became desolate ghost towns within a matter of hours. Corporate insurers based on affluent core worlds instantly revoked coverage for any vessel, cargo, or personnel entering the contested sector. Veteran mercenary companies, outfits that routinely dove into bloody civil wars for the right price, publicly returned their Oryx retainer fees and routed their heavily armed fleets in the exact opposite direction. It was an unspoken law among the stars, learned through brutal historical precedent. You could argue with a human over territorial borders. You could cheat them in complex trade negotiations. You could even skirmish with their border patrols, but no sane entity stood between a human and their offspring. The void around the Dominion became a sterile vacuum, cleared of all life except the perpetrators and the rapidly approaching storm. Aboard her accelerating interceptor, Tamsin received the next heavily encrypted data burst from her brother. Kale had dug relentlessly deeper into the Dominion's scientific registry, bypassing multiple layers of advanced quantum encryption to unearth their core operational mandates. The decoded files laid bare the exact Oryx methodology, and the truth was devoid of any recognizable malice. The Dominion scientists were not sadistic torturers. They had absolutely no intention of physically harming their captives. In their strictly logical, heavily compartmentalized minds, they were merely utilizing an optimal, naturally occurring resource. The internal laboratory memos detailed the intended synchronization process. The captives were to be connected to the ancient artifact via non-invasive, synthetic neural bridges. The Oryx planned to use the innate, unfixed resonance of the young minds as a localized bypass circuit, tricking the ancient machine into unlocking its vast databanks before the human government could mobilize a coherent diplomatic response. Tamsin read the clinical assessments, her hands gripping the edge of the console until her knuckles turned white. The horror washed over her, not from a threat of violence, but from the absolute erasure of humanity. The Oryx did not see her daughter as a sentient, feeling being. They did not see a little girl who loved the smell of synthetic rain or who hummed off-key when she was nervous. They saw a biological key. They saw a living, breathing interface plug. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it, the profound lack of basic empathy, was infinitely more chilling than any overt declaration of war. They had quantified the souls of 52 children and categorized them as disposable hardware. As Tamsin processed the grim reality of the Dominion's perspective, a priority channel forcefully opened on her secondary communication console. It bypassed her standard Vanguard filters, carrying the unmistakable, highly complex cryptographic signature of the Oral Concord's High Analytical Council. It was a localized, text-only transmission delivered directly to her ship by an allied intelligence network that was terrified of the impending outcome. The Oral scholars had been closely monitoring the subspace echoes emanating from the target moon. Their message was stark, devoid of any diplomatic cushioning. The ancient device the Oryx were attempting to breach was not merely a passive vault of knowledge. It was a localized reality anchor, a piece of foundational technology deeply tied to the spatial fabric of the surrounding sector. The oral warning explicitly stated that if the Dominion forced the machine open using incompatible, stressed, or traumatized biological interfaces, the resulting energy feedback loop would not just destroy the research facility. It would not just shatter the moon. It would trigger a cascading spatial collapse. A localized tear in the dimensional membrane would occur, expanding outward at near light speeds, instantly swallowing several major interstellar transit routes. Tamsin stared at the stark white text against the black screen. The stakes had just exponentially multiplied, transforming a localized rescue operation into an apocalyptic crisis. This was no longer merely a kidnapping. The Dominion, in their blind, arrogant pursuit of ancient technological supremacy, were unknowingly gambling with the lives of millions of innocent travelers, merchants, and colonists residing in the adjacent sectors. They were playing with a cosmic detonator, and they were using stolen children as the raw wiring. On the long-range tactical sensors, the vanguard of the human armada silently crossed the invisible boundary into Dominion space. They did not broadcast ultimatums. They did not send robotic emissaries to negotiate a peaceful surrender. They did not jam the local communication frequencies with demands. Thousands of human vessels, ranging from state-of-the-art warships bristling with kinetic weaponry to rust-bucket atmospheric transports, pushing their engines past the red line, simply flew forward in a massive, unstoppable wedge. The combined glare of their thruster trails formed a colossal, glowing spearhead driving through the dark. Deep space monitoring stations belonging to a dozen different alien empires watched the incoming telemetry in absolute, paralyzed dread. The complete and total absence of human communication was suffocating. In the fortified command centers of alien worlds, seasoned military analysts and veteran political leaders stared at their holographic screens, watching the relentless, mute advance. A single, terrified question echoed through the halls of galactic power, whispered by species that suddenly realized how little they understood the apex predators of Earth. What are they going to do when they get there? The hum of the slipstream drive usually offered a sterile comfort, a white noise that helped tactical officers focus before a drop. But inside the cramped cockpit of the Interceptor, Tamsin Vale heard only one thing. She had muted the proximity alarms, silenced the Vanguard fleet coordination channels, and lowered the environmental ambient sounds to near zero. On her primary display, a single, heavily degraded audio file looped endlessly. It was a fragmented recording Kale had managed to scrape from the peripheral acoustic sensors inside the Illyr holding sectors. It was a voice. It was Juniper. To the Oryx analysts monitoring the captives, the sound was classified as biological self-soothing, a meaningless vocalization produced by a stressed mammalian specimen. It sounded like a distorted, off-key nursery rhyme, broken by static and the heavy thrum of alien life support purifiers. But Tamsin was not an alien scientist looking at a data point. She was a mother listening to her heart outside her body. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the pilot seat. The tactical armor suddenly felt suffocatingly heavy. For a brief, agonizing moment, the cold commander vanished, leaving only a woman desperate to reach through the void and hold her 10-year-old girl. Juniper was not crying. She was singing. Tamsin let the rhythm wash over her, dissecting the cadence not with a military decryptor, but with a maternal instinct forged over a decade of bedtimes, scraped knees, and rainy afternoons. The melody was disjointed, but the underlying beat was rigidly consistent. 2 short hums, a long pause, 3 sharp vocal taps against her teeth, another pause, then a rising glissando. A ghost of a smile, sharp and painful, flickered across Tamsin's face. She knew this rhythm. When Juniper was 5 years old, terrified of the dark after a station-wide power failure, Tamsin had built a game to help her navigate the Stavehold corridors. She had used a modified holographic projector to create a maze of light on the floor. To get through the maze without stepping on the shadows, they had invented a counting song. It was a silly, repetitive tune about a little space mouse finding its way home. 2 steps forward, wait for the light. 3 steps sideways, out of the night. Tamsin snapped her eyes open. The grief vanished, instantly replaced by a razor-sharp surge of adrenaline. Juniper was not just singing to calm herself. She opened the secure link to her brother. The channel connected instantly, devoid of any greeting. "Kale, I am sending you an audio file," Tamsin said, her voice dropping into a rapid, urgent cadence. It is the vocal track from Juniper. I need you to overlay the rhythm of her song onto the architectural schematics of the Ilir subterranean facility. Map the short beats to intersections, the long pauses to security checkpoints or blast doors, and the rising notes to elevation changes. There was a heavy silence on the line for exactly 4 seconds. Running the overlay now, Cale replied, his tone shifting from detached operative to focused analyst. A new holographic rendering materialized in the center of Tamsin's cockpit. The blue wireframe model of the ancient Oryx research bunker spun slowly. Then, a glowing yellow line began to trace its way through the labyrinthine corridors, moving in perfect synchronization with the audio file playing in the background. 2 short beats. The yellow line took 2 left turns past the primary holding cells. A long pause. The line stopped exactly at a heavy security bulkhead. 3 sharp taps. The line bypassed the main concourse and routed through an auxiliary ventilation shaft. My God, Cale breathed over the comms. It is a perfect match. She is not just sitting there. Tam. She has memorized the acoustic reflections of the facility. She is broadcasting a viable infiltration route. Tamsin felt a sudden, fierce swell of pride that temporarily eclipsed her terror. Her little girl was terrified, trapped millions of light years from home, and her first instinct was to start drawing a map for the rescue team. Juniper was entirely lucid, and she was actively guiding them in. Show me the rest of them. Cale, Tamsin demanded. Show me the visual fragments you pulled from the other holding blocks. What are the other children doing? The main monitor fractured into a mosaic of grainy, low-light video feeds. What Tamsin saw, fundamentally, broke her heart while simultaneously cementing her faith in the human spirit. The 52 children were not curled into fetal positions, paralyzed by the incomprehensible horror of their situation. The older children, the 12 and 13-year-olds, had physically positioned themselves between the younger ones and the transparent energy barriers of their cells. They were communicating across the divided rooms, using the rhythmic tapping Tamsin had discovered earlier. They were organizing. In one feed, a group of 7-year-olds were sitting in a tight circle, holding hands. Their eyes were closed, their breathing synchronized. They were playing a game. Tamsin recognized the deep, psychological coping mechanism. Children possessed an unparalleled ability to normalize the absurd. Faced with an alien abduction and an ancient, dormant machine, they had subconsciously formed a team. They were turning the trauma into a shared, cooperative challenge to keep the creeping despair at bay. And at the center of this invisible network was Juniper. Tamsin watched a close-up feed of her daughter. Juniper's hands were pressed flat against the dark metal of the floor. Her eyes were unfocused, staring into the middle distance. Cale's accompanying data stream highlighted a profound discovery. The ambient resonance of the lullaby engine, the massive precursor artifact buried beneath them, was not emitting a mathematical frequency, as the Oryx scientists had assumed. Juniper had figured it out first. The machine was breathing. It was emitting a complex, shifting rhythm based on emotional resonance. The Oryx could not turn it on because they were trying to unlock it with logic and cold algorithms. The children, led by Juniper's intuitive grasp of the rhythm, were subconsciously syncing their own emotional frequencies to the machine to keep it pacified. They were treating the doomsday device like a frightened animal that needed to be calmed. Tamsin reached out, her gloved fingers hovering millimeters from the holographic image of her daughter's face. They are fighting a war down there, she thought, and their only weapons are nursery rhymes and held hands. She pulled her hand back and replayed the final 10 seconds of the audio file. She listened to the cadence of the Light Maze song as it reached its conclusion. 2 short hums, a long pause, 3 sharp taps. Then, a sudden, jarring shift. The final note did not rise. It dropped, flat and heavy, falling exactly 1 tempo behind the established rhythm. To anyone else, it was a child running out of breath or losing track of the melody. But Tamsin's blood ran cold. In the light maze game back on Stavehold, the hologram would occasionally spawn red warning tiles. If Juniper stepped on one, the game would buzz and reset. Tamsin had taught her a specific signal for those moments. A dropped beat, a deliberate break in the rhythm that meant absolute cessation of movement. It meant freeze. It meant the path ahead was rigged to explode. Do not step forward. Do not attack. Don't shoot. Tamsin froze the audio. The tactical reality of the situation crashed down upon her with crushing weight. Juniper was deliberately warning her. The little girl had realized something the Vanguard fleet had not yet grasped. Tamsin stared at the navigation console. Behind her interceptor, a massive, silent armada of human warships and civilian vessels was bearing down on the Oryx border. Their weapon systems charging, their targeting computers locking onto the Illyr moon. The human doctrine was simple: breach the facility, neutralize the captors, and extract the targets. A fast, overwhelming kinetic strike. But the message embedded in the song changed everything. The children were already emotionally tethered to the lullaby engine. They were actively holding its volatile energy in check. If the Vanguard fleet bombarded the moon, or if heavily armed shock troops breached the facility and initiated a chaotic firefight, the sudden spike in terror and adrenaline from the children would violently sever that delicate synchronization. If they attacked hastily, the ancient machine would interpret the sudden emotional chaos as a hostile breach. It would clamp down defensively, either triggering the localized spatial collapse the Oral had warned about, or permanently fusing the children's developing consciousnesses into its dark matter architecture. Tamsin was staring at the most agonizing paradox a commander and a mother could ever face. To save her daughter quickly was to kill her instantly. A direct assault would become a flawless execution. The only way to win this war was to somehow stop the unstoppable human armada before they fired a single shot, and find a way to walk into the heart of an alien stronghold without pulling a trigger. The neutral transfer hub of Orun hung in the void like a solitary silver pendulum, carefully positioned on the absolute edge of Oryx Dominion space. It was a place built for whispers, for backdoor treaties, and for the quiet exchange of prisoners. It was not built to host the vanguard of a species holding its breath. Tamsin Vale's boots hit the polished deck of the diplomatic concourse with a heavy, rhythmic thud. The station was almost entirely abandoned. The usual crowds of merchants and envoys had fled the moment the human fleet registered on long-range scanners. The only entity waiting for her in the vast, vaulted observation lounge was Ambassador Sareth Iln of the Oral Concord. Sareth was ancient, even by the standards of his own long-lived species. His tall, reedy frame was draped in iridescent robes that shifted in color depending on his emotional state. Right now, the fabric was a flat, dead gray. He did not offer a traditional greeting of peace. He simply turned from the massive viewport, which looked out into the starless expanse, separating them from the Dominion. "Commander Vale," Sareth said, his voice a melodic hum, synthesized through his vocal translator. "I have spent 4 centuries studying your species. I have advocated for your inclusion in the galactic community. Yet, I must confess something to you today, a sentiment I have never harbored before." Tamsin stopped a few paces away, her posture rigid, her hand resting instinctively near the empty holster on her hip. She had left her weapon on the ship. She needed the aliens to focus on her words, not her hardware. "What is that, Ambassador?" "I am afraid," Sareth replied softly. "But I am not afraid for you. I am terrified for them." He gestured gracefully toward the sector of space where the Oryx homeworlds lay hidden. "The galactic archives hold vast records of human history," Sareth continued, pacing slowly across the floor. "We have watched you fracture over borders, spill blood over resources, and burn your own cities over ideological differences. The Dominion looked at that history and saw a chaotic, divided prey. But they fundamentally misunderstood one absolute constant in your nature: No one touches your children. The Oryx did not just cross a line. They erased the concept of a boundary entirely. Before Tamsin could respond, the heavy blast doors of the lounge slid open with a harsh, mechanical groan. The station's security protocols had been overridden. A massive figure stepped into the room. Marshal HFY of the Thren Compact did not wear diplomatic attire. He wore the heavy, scarred combat plating of a frontline commander. The Thren were a hulking, reptilian species, bred for high-gravity warfare. 70 standard years ago, HFY had commanded the Thren invasion force that had tried, and failed, to annex a human outer colony. He did not wait for an invitation to speak. His translator barked in a deep, guttural tone. "I monitored your approach, Commander," the marshal grumbled, his heavy boots denting the pristine floor. He turned his scarred snout toward the oral ambassador. "You are wasting your breath on philosophy. Sereth, the Oryx are blind. I have tried to warn their military council." Tamsin looked at the towering alien veteran. "And what did you tell them?" Marshal HFY's eyes, dark and bottomless, locked onto Tamsin. "I told them the truth of my own failures. I told them that when humans come for their children, do not measure their strength by the number of ships they bring. Measure it by what they are willing to absolutely not forgive. I told them you will not stop until the moon of Elir is dust, or until your young are back in your arms." They did not listen. Through a secure, encrypted holographic projector in the center of the room, a feed from the Oryx High Council flickered into existence. Sereth had bypassed their internal communications network to give Tamsin a window into the minds of her enemies. The council chamber was in a state of controlled chaos. The alien delegates, with their multi-limbed, angular forms, were split into two viciously opposed factions. On one side stood the lead scientists of the artifact project. They were waving digital slates, speaking rapidly and clicking, mathematical cadences, demanding more time. They argued that the biological interface was almost complete, that the lullaby engine was on the verge of decoding centuries of precursor technology. On the other side, the political leaders were radiating panic. They were watching the same long-range sensors HFY was watching. They wanted the human children ejected from the facility immediately, dumped onto a neutral transport to save their own civilization from the impending hammer blow. An Oryx legal analyst stepped into the center of their chamber, holding up a physical data drive. "We must transmit the signed pan-galactic treaties to the human commander," the analyst clicked frantically. "We have the proper forms. We have the legal justification for temporary biological preservation. We can mitigate this in a tribunal." Sereth Iln, standing next to Tamsin in the neutral station, spoke into the open channel, his voice slicing through the alien panic like a surgical blade. "If you are still talking about forms," the oral ambassador stated coldly, "it means you do not understand what is coming for you." Tamsin stepped forward, directly into the pickup zone of the holographic projector. The arguing Oryx Council members froze as the image of the human mother materialized in the center of their chamber. She did not yell. She did not slam her fists. Her face was a mask of terrifying, unnatural calm. "This is Commander Tamsin Vale," she said, her voice completely devoid of inflection. "I am sending you a single set of coordinates and a timeline. You will transfer all 52 children to the neutral station of Orun. You have 30 hours. She did not add a threat. She did not say what would happen if they failed to comply. The omission of a consequence was heavier than any spoken promise of violence. Instead, Tamsin reached over to the station's communication console and pressed a single button. She commanded the Vanguard fleet, waiting silently in the deep dark, to drop their stealth baffles and open their broad-spectrum sensor emissions. On the Oryx Council's main strategic display, the void suddenly ignited. Thousands upon thousands of human vessels flared into existence. Warships, freighters, mining rigs, and private yachts, all sitting shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable wall of metal and fusion fire. The sheer scale of the mobilization defied logistical reality. In the Oryx chamber, the leader of the scientific hardliners stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in arrogant defiance. "They are posturing," he sneered to his peers. "This is a primitive intimidation tactic. They are displaying their assets to force a favorable negotiation over the return timeline." "Call their bluff." Sareth Iln looked at the Oryx scientist with an expression of profound, chilling pity. The ancient ambassador leaned into the microphone. "You stole human children," Sareth said softly, the weight of 1,000 years of galactic observation behind his words. "And you still think this is a negotiation? You are mad." The holographic feed from the council chamber abruptly cut out, replaced a moment later by a direct, text-based transmission from the Oryx Central Command. The arrogant posturing was gone, replaced by a desperate, administrative stall tactic. Tamsin read the text as it scrolled across the display. "The Oryx Dominion requests a temporary extension of the 30-hour mandate. Immediate extraction of the subjects is currently impossible. We require time to stabilize the interface withdrawal ritual." Tamsin felt the breath leave her lungs. The room around her seemed to drop in temperature. Oskve growled a low, rumbling curse in his native tongue. They were not stalling out of pride. They were stalling out of terror. The phrase, "stabilize the interface withdrawal ritual," confirmed her worst fears, perfectly aligning with the hidden message Juniper had tapped into the audio feed. The Oryx had pushed too far. The 52 children were no longer just captives locked in a room. They were neurologically and emotionally tethered to the ancient, volatile heart of the lullaby engine. The alien scientists had plugged the children in, but now they realized they had absolutely no idea how to safely unplug them. The holographic projector in the center of the neutral Orin hub flickered, shifting from the frozen image of the panicked alien council to a dense, cascading waterfall of decrypted data. Tamsin Vale did not blink. Beside her, the towering Thren Marshal and the ancient Oral Ambassador stepped closer, their alien eyes reflecting the ghostly blue light of human intelligence work. Kale had finally broken through the bedrock of the Dominion's black site servers. The information he was transmitting was not military telemetry or political correspondence. It was the raw, unadulterated archaeological core of the Ilir excavation. It was the truth. "Commander," Kale said, his voice echoing through the vast, empty lounge. The usual detached cadence of the intelligence operative was gone, replaced by a profound, almost reverent awe. "Everything the galactic community thought they knew about the lullaby engine is fundamentally incorrect. It is not an archive. It is not a vault of precursor knowledge. It is a dam." The data stream coalesced into a breathtaking three-dimensional rendering of the artifact buried beneath the moon. It was an architecture of impossible geometry, woven from strands of crystallized dark matter and quantum resonance chambers. It looked less like a machine and more like the fossilized nervous system of a celestial leviathan. Kale began to translate the decoded precursor glyphs. Millions of years ago, an unknown, apex civilization had mapped the foundational fabric of the universe. They discovered that reality was not a static canvas, but a shifting tectonic plate of space and time. Occasionally, microscopic fractures would form in this fabric. If left unchecked, these fractures would tear wide open, creating cataclysmic wormhole storms capable of swallowing entire solar systems. The lullaby engine was their solution. It was a reality harmonic regulator. It was designed to detect these spatial fault lines and stitch them back together using pure, localized emotional resonance. "To operate a machine that manipulates reality," Kale explained, the holographic engine pulsing in rhythm with his words. "You cannot use cold mathematics or digital algorithms. You have to feel the fabric of space. The engine requires a consciousness model capable of complete, uninhibited collective empathy. It needs a neural network that is not locked into a rigid sense of individual self." Sareth Iln let out a soft, melodic gasp. his iridescent robes shimmering with sudden, vibrant hues of absolute astonishment. "The children," the ancient ambassador whispered. "Exactly," Kale confirmed. "Adult minds, whether human, oryx, or oral, are too crystallized. Our egos, our traumas, our distinct identities act as insulation. We cannot synchronize. But human children are different. Their cognitive architecture is still fluid. They naturally form empathetic networks. They feel a collective joy, a collective fear, without the boundaries of the adult ego." To the lullaby engine, a group of human children is not a collection of individuals. It is a perfectly unified choir of raw, constructive consciousness. The oryx had not stumbled blindly into kidnapping. They had detected a microscopic spatial fracture forming in a neighboring star ring, a cosmic disaster that would eventually consume billions of lives. Instead of bringing this discovery to the galactic community and asking for collaborative help, the Dominion saw an opportunity for absolute supremacy. If they could secretly control the lullaby engine, they could monopolize the technology of reality manipulation. They could hold the safety of the entire sector hostage. They just needed the right keys to turn the ignition. But they had profoundly underestimated the locks. Kale pulled up a new set of telemetry, correlating the energy output of the ancient machine with the biometric data of the 52 human captives. The revelation hit Tamsin with the force of a kinetic strike. The oryx scientists had tried to force the engine open using harsh, artificial neural bridges. They treated the artifact like a dead battery that needed jump-starting. But the lullaby engine was semi-sentient. When the oryx forced the connection, the machine experienced the structural equivalent of agonizing pain. It began to violently destabilize. The facility on Alir should have been atomized days ago. It had not collapsed because the oryx were brilliant scientists. It had not collapsed because of alien containment fields. "Look at the resonance waves," Kale urged, highlighting a delicate, golden thread of energy winding through the chaotic red spikes of the engine's distress signals. "It is Juniper. It is all of them." Tamsin stared at the golden thread. It matched the exact tempo of the light maze song. The children had felt the machine's agony. Locked in their cells, terrified and alone, their developing empathetic minds had instinctively reached out to the massive, suffering entity beneath their feet. Juniper had found the rhythm first, and the others had followed. They were not just coping with their captivity, they were actively managing a cosmic crisis. 52 human children were currently holding a region of space together by singing, counting beats, and comforting an ancient machine the same way they would comfort a frightened stray animal. They were acting as a living, emotional buffer against a localized apocalypse. Tamsin took a slow, deep breath, the air in the neutral station suddenly feeling heavy with the weight of dying stars. The tactical paradigm of the entire Vanguard operation had just shattered. A few hours ago, the objective was brutally simple: breach the moon, slaughter the alien captors, and bring the children home. But now, Tamsin saw the invisible tripwire strung across the sector. If the human armada unleashed hell upon the Alir facility, the resulting shockwave of violence, the sudden spike of absolute terror from the children as explosions rocked their cells, would instantly sever their empathetic synchronization. If the children broke their rhythm, the lullaby engine would react like a wounded, cornered beast. It would violently spasm, tearing the moon apart and ripping a hole in reality that would swallow the Vanguard fleet, the neutral station, and the children themselves. "We cannot fire a single weapon," Tamsin said aloud, her voice eerily calm despite the monstrous truth. "If we attack, we kill them. We kill everything within 10 light years. The objective is no longer a rescue. It is a surgical extraction. We have to walk in there, take the children out without breaking their connection to the machine. And we have to do it without letting the Oryx retain control of the technology." Marshal Oskve let out a low rumble of profound respect. "A war fought on the edge of a knife, Commander." How do you disarm a bomb that is kept stable by the heartbeat of a child? Before Tamsin could formulate an answer, Cale's voice returned, dropping an octave into a register of pure, icy dread. There is one more thing, Commander. I just cracked the Dominion's final contingency protocol. It was scheduled to activate the moment you issued your 30-hour deadline. The holographic display shifted again, bringing up a heavily redacted internal Oryx command authorization. It detailed a process called a localized cognitive reformatting. The Oryx know they have lost, Cale explained, the disgust palpable even through the encrypted audio. They know they cannot hold the facility against the Vanguard, and they know the galactic community will demand a tribunal. But they still want the data. They still want the secret of the engine. Tamsin read the alien text. Her blood turned to ice. To prevent the human subjects from testifying before a pan-galactic court about the true nature of the artifact, the Oryx scientists had prepared a massive, targeted amnesic wave. Just before handing the children over to the Vanguard, they intended to flood the holding sectors with a localized neural scrub. It would forcefully sever the children's connection to the lullaby engine and permanently wipe their memories of the entire traumatic experience. The Dominion intended to hand back 52 blank slates. The children would not remember the kidnapping. They would not remember the machine. And they would not remember the profound, beautiful thing they had done to save a star system. They would be returned physically unharmed, leaving the Oryx with plausible deniability and the stolen mechanics of reality. They are going to erase them, Tamsin whispered, the mother inside her finally rising to the surface, cold and terrifying. The alien factions thought they were dealing with a military commander. They were about to discover the boundless, surgical wrath of someone fighting for the very soul of her child. The holographic projection faded, leaving the neutral observation lounge bathed in the cold light of distant stars. Tamsin Vale did not hesitate. She opened a secure, direct channel to the flagship of the Solarian Vanguard. Admiral Brensol's face appeared, tense and hardened. "Commander, the fleet is primed. Target locks are acquired on all primary defense batteries of the Ilir moon. Give me the word, and we will turn their orbital perimeter to slag in under 4 minutes." "Hold your fire, Admiral," Tamsin ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "If we fire a single shot, we lose them all. The children are tethered to a localized spatial anomaly. We are executing a diplomatic breach." Brensol frowned deeply, the scars on his cheek pulling taut. "A diplomatic breach. They have our people." "Which is exactly why we are going to make them open the door for us," Tamsin said. She terminated the link. She turned to Ambassador Sareth Iln. Together, they crafted a transmission that was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. They did not declare war. Instead, they formally requested immediate, unhindered access to the Ilir facility for a neutral verification delegation, consisting solely of Tamsin and the Oral Ambassador. The logic was inescapable. If the Oryx Dominion truly held the children under a legal educational transfer, they had no grounds to deny a welfare inspection by a recognized neutral party. A refusal would instantly reclassify the situation as a hostile hostage crisis, legally compelling the Thren Compact and the Oral Concord to join the human armada in open warfare. Trapped by their own bureaucratic hubris, the Oryx High Council capitulated. The clearance codes for a single shuttle were transmitted 20 minutes later. As Tamsin and Sareth boarded the unarmed transport, a final burst of encrypted data flashed across Tamsin's wrist console. It was Cale. "Tam, listen carefully." Her brother's voice was clipped, stripped of all emotion. "The scientific hardliners are panicking. They accepted your arrival, but they are spooling up the memory rebalancing wave. They plan to trigger it the second you authorize the handover. They want to hand you 52 amnesiacs and keep the data." Tamsin gripped the handrail as the shuttle detached from the neutral hub. "How long until the wave is fully charged?" "Less than 2 hours," Cale replied. You have to disable their internal network before you sign the release manifest. The descent to the tidally locked moon was a plunge into absolute darkness. The Ilir research facility was a brutalist structure of gray composite metals, bolted directly into the cratered surface. Stepping out of the airlock, Tamsin felt a profound, suffocating chill that had nothing to do with the atmospheric regulators. The corridors of the Dominion Black Site were pristine. The walls were a gleaming, flawless white. The floors were polished to a mirror finish. Autonomous cleaning drones hummed quietly along the baseboards. It was a terrifying, clinical perfection. They had built a sterile, orderly laboratory, deliberately masking the grotesque reality that the entire foundation of this structure rested upon the kidnapped voices of human children. The neatness was a lie, a desperate attempt to sanitize an atrocity. As they marched down the main concourse, flanked by a squad of silent, multi-limbed Oryx security synthetics, Sareth leaned closer to Tamsin. His iridescent robes had shifted to a deep, bruised purple. "Commander," the ancient alien whispered, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the ventilation systems. "Before we engage their director, there is a final piece of the precursor puzzle you must know. The oral archives yielded one last translation regarding the artifact." Tamsin kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, matching the brisk pace of their escorts. "Tell me, the lullaby engine is not merely a tool. It is a judge," Sareth explained softly. "The precursor civilization designed it to ensure their technology would never fall into the hands of tyrants. If a species attempts to coerce immature, unformed minds to control the engine, the machine possesses an internal moral failsafe. It will mark the aggressor species as inherently unworthy of possessing living knowledge." Tamsin processed the gravity of his words. "You are saying the Oryx are not just facing human retaliation?" "I am saying," Sareth replied, "that if they push this too far, the artifact itself will broadcast their genetic signature to the ancient network as a galactic parasite. They will be locked out of every precursor ruin in the cosmos forever. They are about to be judged by the very gods they are trying to rob." The blast doors to the Central Command Center hissed open. The room was a sprawling amphitheater of holographic data streams and monitoring stations. Standing at the center, surrounded by nervous technicians, was HFY, the director of the Ilir excavation. He was a tall, imposing figure, his carapace adorned with the silver markings of high academic achievement. He tried to project an aura of absolute control, but Tamsin could see the faint tremor in his secondary appendages. "Commander Vale, Ambassador Iln," HFY said, offering a stiff, abbreviated bow. "Your arrival is premature. The subjects are still undergoing their final observational cycle." Tamsin walked slowly into the room. She did not look at the technicians. She did not look at the tactical displays. She locked her gaze entirely on the director. "I am not here to observe a cycle, Director," Tamsin stated, her voice slicing through the ambient noise of the room. "I am here to collect my daughter and 51 other citizens of the Solarian Vanguard." HFY bristled, his mandibles clicking in defensive irritation. "You mischaracterize the situation, Commander. Our actions, while unconventional, were a mathematical necessity. Our deep space telemetry detected a massive spatial rupture forming in the adjacent star ring. We brought the subjects here to stabilize the anomaly. We saved those children from a potential natural disaster. It was the ultimate intellectual defense, cloaking a horrific act in the guise of the greater good." Tamsin did not raise her voice. She did not argue the ethics of kidnapping. She knew exactly how to dismantle a creature of pure logic. Tamsin tapped her collar, activating the high-definition recording device embedded in her uniform. A small red light blinked to life, indicating a live broadcast feed transmitting directly to the Oral, the Thren, and the entire human fleet waiting in the dark. "Is that your official position, Director?" Tamsin asked, her tone entirely conversational. "It is the undeniable truth," Heshtal replied, puffing out his chest. Tamsin took one step closer, invading his personal space. "Excellent. Then I require you to make a simple, clarifying statement for the galactic record. I want you to look directly into this lens and formally declare your methodology." Heshtal narrowed his eyes, sensing the trap, but unable to see the teeth. "What statement?" Tamsin's face was carved from glacial ice. "Look at the camera, Director Heshtal, and say the following words. Human children are not people. They are biological interfaces." The command center went dead silent. The technicians stopped typing. Even the humming of the processing cores seemed to quiet down. Heshtal opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the blinking red light. He looked at the imposing, armored human woman standing before him. He knew that if he spoke that sentence, no treaty, no legal loophole, and no scientific breakthrough would save his species from the absolute, unyielding wrath of the entire galaxy. He would be confessing to the ultimate cosmic sin. The director of the Ilir excavation stood frozen, completely stripped of his arrogance, unable to utter a single sound. In that heavy, pregnant silence, a new noise bled into the command center. It did not come from the speakers or the atmospheric vents. It reverberated up through the solid metal of the floor plates, rattling the teeth in Tamsin's skull. It was a massive, subterranean vibration. It was a chord. It was not the fragmented, chaotic distress signal Kale had shown her earlier. This was a deep, resonant, and impossibly complex harmony. It sounded like a choir of ancient brass instruments, tuning themselves in the dark. Tamsin recognized the underlying tempo instantly. It was the rhythm of the light maze song, but magnified 1,000,000 times over, infused with a raw, terrifying power. Sareth Iln gripped Tamsin's arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. The lullaby engine was no longer simply crying out in pain. Guided by the steady, unified voices of 52 human children, the ancient machine was fully waking up. The descent into the crust of Ilir took exactly 14 minutes. The heavy cargo elevator carried Tamsin Vale, Ambassador Sareth Iln, and a Vanguard medical team of 4 into the belly of the moon. They followed the massive, reverberating chord that continued to echo up through the elevator shaft. A sound that bypassed the auditory nerves and vibrated directly in the marrow of their bones. When the heavy doors finally parted, they did not step into a sterile alien laboratory. They stepped into a cathedral of living physics. The lullaby engine was not a singular mechanical object. It was a sprawling, subterranean metropolis of crystallized dark matter and soaring arches of solidified light. Vast rivers of luminescent energy flowed through transparent conduits, pulsing in time with the deep, foundational hum of the artifact. The air itself was thick, vibrating with a harmonic resonance that tasted faintly of ozone and copper. It was a place of impossible, breathtaking wonder, built by gods who had long since faded into dust. In the center of this colossal cavern, suspended over the glowing heart of the engine, on a massive observation platform, were the 52 human children. Tamsin stepped off the elevator, her breath catching in her throat. She had mentally prepared herself for the worst. She had expected to find them locked in cramped cages, bound by energy shackles, weeping and broken. The reality was infinitely more disturbing. The Oryx had placed the children in a sprawling array of open, lotus-shaped pods woven from soft, temperature-regulating synthetic fibers. The environment was meticulously designed for physical comfort. There were interactive educational displays, arrays of nutrient-dense sweetwaters, and soft, warm lighting. The alien scientists had provided premium synthetic garments and zero-gravity play zones. This was the true, chilling horror of the Dominion's methodology. The Oryx had not tortured the children with physical pain. They had built a gilded, perfectly engineered terrarium, treating the human captives like prize orchids in a botanical greenhouse. They had provided every biological necessity to ensure the neurological yield remained pure and unstressed. It was an atrocity born of perfect, soulless hospitality. The inhumanity lay entirely in the fact that they had weaponized care, turning basic childhood comfort into an industrial extraction tool. Tamsin broke formation, her tactical discipline evaporating as she spotted a familiar shock of dark hair. She dropped to her knees on the polished platform. Juniper saw her. Any normal 10-year-old girl, upon seeing her mother after days of terrifying captivity, would have screamed, cried, and sprinted into her arms. Juniper did none of those things. She walked toward Tamsin with a steady, terrifyingly measured pace. Her small hands were glowing faintly with the residual geometric dust of the alien neural interfaces. Juniper stopped exactly 2 feet away, looked her mother dead in the eye, and asked a question that shattered Tamsin's heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "How long can you hold the beat?" "Mom," Tamsin froze, her arms still outstretched. "What?" Juniper did not blink. She gestured toward the scattered groups of children behind her. "We had to divide the work," the little girl explained, her voice steady, stripped of its childhood innocence and replaced by the pragmatic weight of a frontline commander. "Elias and the older boys are doing the baseline counts. Every 4 seconds. They tap the floor. The little kids, the 5-year-olds. They do the melody. We told them it was a choir game so they would not get scared. I am on the color watch. When the big pillars down there shift from blue to violet, it means the machine is getting anxious. I have to signal the baseline to slow down. If I leave, the violet light spreads," Tamsin realized, with a wave of profound, suffocating grief, that her daughter was not asking for a rescue. She was asking for a shift change. Juniper knew that if she broke her concentration to hug her mother, the harmonic shield would destabilize, and the children behind her would be consumed by the spatial anomaly. The 52 captives had formed a spontaneous, self-governing society based entirely on mutual survival and empathy. They were not crying for help because they were too busy keeping each other alive. Tamsin was forced to watch as the undeniable evidence of her daughter's forced maturity stood before her. They had grown up in the span of a few days, shedding their childhoods to become the guardians of a dying star system, a burden no child in the universe should ever have to bear. Sarathiln walked slowly to the edge of the platform, his iridescent robes glowing with a blinding, reverent white light. He watched the delicate, golden strands of emotional energy connecting the human children to the precursor artifact. "Commander Vale," the ambassador breathed, his voice trembling with a profound, almost religious awe. The Oryx believed this machine was a vault that required mathematical perfection to open. They were entirely wrong. The precursor civilization built this reality engine to seek out a very specific psychological profile before it would yield its power. It was searching for the concept of ultimate guardianship. Sarath pointed to a group of 12-year-olds who were gently holding the hands of the toddlers, guiding their humming. "The machine is learning," Sarath continued, his eyes wide. "It is watching them. It sees that true strength is not the ability to dominate reality with logic or force, but the instinct to protect those who are smaller and weaker. The children are feeding it the very concept of selfless love. The precursors did not want a master for their technology. They wanted a parent." As if responding directly to the ambassador's realization, the central spire of the lullaby engine flared with a brilliant, golden luminescence. A massive holographic symbol projected itself into the air, hovering directly above Tamsin. It was a complex, swirling glyph, yet its meaning bypassed visual translation and imprinted directly onto her consciousness through the resonant field. The ancient machine had analyzed the emotional signature of humanity. It had looked past the warships and the violent history of Earth, focusing entirely on the fierce, unbreakable devotion radiating from the children and the mother who had crossed the stars to find them. The engine recognized them. The glyph translated into a single, profound title: the species that keeps the fire warm for the next generation. It was a cosmic validation, an absolute judgment of human worthiness delivered by the ghosts of the ancient universe. But the moment of transcendent beauty was violently, brutally severed. The soft, ambient blue light of the Oryx monitoring equipment surrounding the platform suddenly snapped to a harsh, blinding crimson. A mechanical klaxon shattered the harmonic chanting of the children, causing several of the younger ones to cry out in sudden terror. The massive pillars of the lullaby engine shifted instantly from calm blue to an angry, unstable violet. High above them, safe behind the fortified walls of the command center, Director HFY had realized his complete loss of control, unable to keep the engine, and terrified of the galactic tribunal that awaited him. He had executed his final, spiteful contingency. Heavy blast doors slammed shut across the elevator shaft, sealing Tamsin, Sereth, and the medical team inside the cavern. A high-pitched, artificial whine began to build in the alien air vents, drowning out the children's voices. It was the cognitive reformatting protocol. The memory wipe had been triggered, a tidal wave of neurological erasure designed to scrub the minds of the 52 children clean, burying their heroism, their trauma, and the truth of the Oryx's crimes in permanent darkness. The artificial whine of the cognitive scrub tore through the subterranean cavern, a frequency specifically designed to shred short-term neural pathways. It hit the children like a physical blow. Several toddlers collapsed to the metal grating, crying out as the forced amnesia violently clawed at their developing minds. The lullaby engine reacted instantly. It did not interpret the memory wipe as a medical procedure. It felt the sudden, agonizing mental spike from the young consciousnesses it had bonded with, and it perceived a lethal attack on its guardians. The entire moon of Alir convulsed. Massive crystalline pillars that had been glowing a serene, steady blue instantly flashed a violent, radioactive crimson. The subterranean metropolis groaned as tectonic plates shifted beneath the alien research facility, threatening to crush the structure like an eggshell. Tamsin's wrist console screamed with a priority override from the Solarian Vanguard flagship. Admiral Brensol's voice was barely audible over the chaotic static of tearing space-time. "Commander, the orbital space is fracturing," the Admiral reported, his standard military composure breaking alongside reality. "Sensors are detecting microscopic wormholes opening in the upper thermosphere. If this destabilization continues for another 4 minutes, the anomaly will breach the planetary gravity well and hit the populated transit lanes. Millions of commuters will be vaporized." Up in the primary command center, Director HFY made his final, desperate play. He opened a broad-spectrum transmission to the observing galactic community. "The Solarian Vanguard's aggressive posturing has triggered a catastrophic artifact failure," he lied, his voice slick with manufactured panic. "We are attempting containment, but the humans have doomed this sector." He never finished his broadcast. Deep in the shadows of the Human Intelligence Network, Kale Vale struck. He did not just leak a few heavily redacted documents. He took the entirety of the Dominion's classified internal network, stripped away the encryption, and violently injected the raw data into every interstellar newsfeed, diplomatic channel, and public forum across the galaxy. The stars bore witness. Trillions of sentient beings suddenly watched a live, unedited stream from the Alir Black Site. They saw the telemetry of the memory wipe being deployed. They saw the clinical, horrifying memos detailing the deliberate use of human children as living starter motors for precursor technology. The political lie evaporated instantly. The galaxy finally saw the undeniable truth. Humanity had not mobilized a terrifying armada for a territorial dispute. They had come to stop an arrogant empire from using their offspring as biological spark plugs. Down on the observation platform, Juniper was on her knees, Her small hands pressed flat against the vibrating metal. Blood trickled from her nose due to the extreme atmospheric pressure shifts. She looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with a terrifying, absolute clarity. "Mom, we cannot hold it," Juniper shouted over the deafening roar of grinding tectonic plates. "The static is too loud in our heads. 52 voices are not enough to push the bad sound away. The machine thinks we are dying. We need a bigger drum." Tamsin understood perfectly. The lullaby engine needed an emotional anchor massive enough to drown out the Oryx memory wipe and prove that its young guardians were not standing alone in the dark. She activated her fleet-wide command channel, bypassing standard Vanguard protocols to speak directly to every human pilot in orbit. "Admiral Saul, do not fire kinetics. Do not breach the hull. I need you to synchronize every power core, every deflector array, and every communication dish in the Armada. You are going to broadcast a single, unified subspace carrier pulse." "A pulse," the Admiral demanded through the static. "Targeting what?" "Targeting nothing," Tamsin ordered. "You are going to give them a rhythm. I am transmitting a specific audio file to your navigation computers. Match the tempo perfectly. Do it right now." In the cold vacuum of space, a moment of profound, unprecedented unity occurred. It was the ultimate manifestation of human defiance. Hundreds of heavily armed warships, thousands of battered mining freighters, and countless civilian transports linked their diagnostic systems together. They ceased all combat maneuvers. They dropped their targeting locks. Then, the human armada began to sing. They did not use vocal cords. They used the raw, thrumming power of fusion engines and tachyon emitters. Tens of thousands of human ships released a synchronized, deep space gravitational pulse. 2 short bursts, a long pause, 3 sharp, consecutive beats. It was a nursery rhyme written in the language of dying stars, echoing down from orbit and slamming directly into the crust of the moon. Inside the cavern, the effect was instantaneous. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the fleet's synchronized rhythm shattered the Oryx memory wipe frequency. It washed over the children, a colossal, invisible heartbeat wrapping around them in a fierce, protective embrace. The lullaby engine felt the pulse. It felt the staggering, unified emotional weight of an entire species refusing to let their children face destruction alone. The violent crimson light flooding the cavern abruptly stabilized, shifting into a blinding, pure white. The precursor machine made its final, definitive choice. It actively reached into the Oryx security grid and dismantled it from the inside out. The heavy blast doors that had sealed Tamsin and her team inside the elevator shaft were violently ripped open by an invisible kinetic force. Every locked bulkhead, every energy shield, and every automated defense turret between the observation platform and the surface landing pads was systematically crushed. The engine had recognized the true parents, and it was opening the doors for them to take their young. "The path is clear," the lead Vanguard medic shouted, rushing forward to gather the disoriented toddlers. "We have an open corridor directly to the extraction shuttles." Ambassador Sereth Iln rushed to help lift a stunned 7-year-old boy. "Commander, the Oryx network is completely paralyzed. We can move all 52 subjects out immediately." Tamsin moved to pick up her daughter, but the tactical overlay on her visor flashed a critical, fatal warning. The reality storm in the upper atmosphere had paused, but it had not dissipated. The lullaby engine was currently stabilized because the human fleet was providing a massive background beat. But the intricate, delicate melody holding the core together was still coming from the minds of the children standing on the platform. Tamsin looked at the massive, pulsating heart of the artifact. It was a delicate scale of pure energy. If she suddenly pulled all 52 children out of the synchronization field at once, the sheer shock of the broken emotional connection would be equivalent to dropping a fusion core. The engine would detonate from the sudden withdrawal, instantly consuming the moon and the evacuation shuttles in a localized spatial collapse. The children had to leave to survive the physical stress, But the machine could not be abandoned abruptly. The synchronization had to be carefully, slowly dialed down. The most terrifying knot of the entire ordeal tightened around Tamsin's chest, stealing the air from her lungs. The children could run, and the fleet could provide the heavy drumbeat from orbit. But someone had to stay inside the epicenter. Someone with a mind capable of echoing the children's resonance had to stand directly in the fire, holding the delicate melody together, feeding the engine a steady stream of pure, parental focus until the very last child was safely off the moon. They could all be saved, but only if someone stayed behind to hold the beat until the very last second. The medical team moved with practiced, silent efficiency. They swept the youngest children into their arms, guiding the disoriented 5- and 6-year-olds toward the newly opened evacuation corridor. The pathway glowed with the warm, white light the lullaby engine had provided, a stark contrast to the sterile oryx aesthetics. Tamsin Vale did not move toward the exit. She dropped to one knee on the observation platform, placing her hands squarely on the vibrating floor plates. The immense, localized reality storm in the upper atmosphere was being held at bay by the heavy gravitational pulse of the human fleet. But the intricate core stabilization, the delicate emotional weaving that kept the machine from shattering, still required a localized anchor. "Start filtering them out," Tamsin commanded the lead medic. "Take the youngest first, then the injured." Juniper stood next to her mother, her small jaw set in a hard line. She watched the other children file out, then looked back at the swirling core of the precursor artifact. "You are staying," Juniper stated. It was not a question. "Someone has to hold the melody until the room is clear," Tamsin replied, her voice steady. "I am going to need your help for a few more minutes. June." For the first time since Tamsin had arrived, Juniper's composure cracked, but not out of fear for herself. The 10-year-old girl glared at her mother, her eyes blazing with sudden, fierce anger. It was not the petulant defiance of a child. It was the sharp, tactical objection of a soldier, realizing their commander was plotting a suicide mission. "If we stay to anchor the beat while the room empties, the feedback loop will concentrate on us," Juniper argued, her voice rising over the hum of the engine. "When the last group leaves, the energy drop will be too fast. You will not have enough time to reach the elevator before the core collapses. You are giving them your escape window." "I am giving them their lives," Tamsin fired back, her tone equally fierce. "And I am not leaving you." We stepped back together, 1 yard at a time, keeping the rhythm. They stared at each other, 2 generations of human resilience locked in a desperate standoff in the heart of an alien world. They were no longer just mother and daughter. They were comrades standing in the epicenter of a dying star, calculating the brutal mathematics of survival. Before Juniper could issue another tactical objection, a tall, iridescent figure stepped directly into the center of the resonance circle. Ambassador Sereth Iln knelt beside Tamsin. His robes had shifted from a bruised purple to a blinding, incandescent gold. "You will not have to hold the withdrawal alone, Commander," the ancient alien said softly. Tamsin looked at him in shock. "Ambassador, your neural architecture is too rigid. The engine will reject you." "The Oral Concord spent 3 centuries studying the biological chord rituals of the deep core species," Sereth replied, closing his dark, ancient eyes. "I cannot lead the melody. My mind is too old, too calcified by politics. But I can hold the subrhythm. I can act as a harmonic bridge to absorb the shock of the energy drop when the children disconnect." He placed his long, graceful hands on the deck. "Humanity has bled for the Oral more than once in our shared history. Today, the Concord balances the ledger." Tamsin did not argue. The final group of 12-year-olds was stepping into the evacuation corridor. The tether was thinning. "On my mark," Tamsin said. She looked at Juniper. 2 steps forward. Wait for the light." Juniper took a deep breath, anchoring her mind to the massive, ancient consciousness beneath them. 3 steps sideways. Out of the night. Outside, in the freezing void of space, the Solarian vanguard and the massive civilian armada continued their heavy, synchronized gravitational pulse. It was the thunderous heartbeat of a protective giant. Inside the cavern, a mother, her daughter, and an ancient alien diplomat began to hum the Stavehold maze song. They transformed a simple, comforting family memory into an interstellar lifeline, weaving their voices into the crystalline architecture of the lullaby engine. The precursor artifact responded. It absorbed the lullaby, wrapping the melody around the retreating minds of the 52 children, cushioning their disconnection. Then, the machine delivered its final judgment. The lullaby engine bypassed the local planetary network and tapped directly into the galactic subspace relays. It did not speak in words. It broadcast a colossal, uncorrupted data package containing the entire, unedited history of the Alir excavation. Trillions of citizens across the spiral arms received the absolute, unvarnished truth directly into their orbital hubs and planetary mainframes. Appended to the data was a single, ancient precursor glyph. It blazed across every screen in the galaxy. When the universal translators processed the symbol, the galactic community fell silent. The glyph was a legal and moral designation from a civilization that had conquered the stars millions of years ago. It translated to unfit to guard living knowledge. In the command center high above the cavern, Director Heshtal watched the broadcast in absolute horror. He realized his legacy was not just ruined. His entire species had just been excommunicated from the technological heritage of the universe. Panicking, he sprinted for the emergency transit tubes, abandoning his technicians. He slapped his palm against the biometric scanner of his private escape pod. The scanner flashed red. The heavy blast doors sealed shut, locking him inside the command center. The lullaby engine had hijacked the Oryx security grid. It was not going to let the architect of this atrocity run away. The hardline faction of the Dominion collapsed live in front of the galaxy, trapped in a cage of their own making. Down in the core, the last child crossed the threshold of the evacuation corridor. Tamsin, Juniper, and Sereth slowly stood up, walking backward, never breaking the rhythm of the song. The golden light of the engine flared, then gently dimmed, entering a safe, dormant cycle. The reality storm in the upper atmosphere quietly dissolved into nothingness. An hour later, the neutral transfer hub of Orun witnessed the impossible. 52 human children walked onto the docking bay, physically exhausted but mentally intact. The Oryx memory wipe had failed completely. The children carried with them the sharp, undeniable memories of their captivity and their triumph. Their direct, unclouded testimonies instantly turned the Dominion's legal defense into worthless ash. Throughout the entire operation, the Solarian vanguard never fired a single kinetic slug. They did not launch a single torpedo. They arrived with enough firepower to turn a solar system to glass, and they left without a single drop of alien blood on their hands. To the observing alien empires, this was the most terrifying revelation of all. They had always feared humanity's capacity for violence, but watching the human fleet execute a flawless, non-lethal extraction of their most precious resource taught the galaxy a profound lesson. When a species is powerful enough to annihilate their enemies without a second thought, but possesses the absolute, ironclad discipline to prioritize saving lives, overtaking them, that is not just a military power. That is an apex predator that has mastered its own soul. 6 months later, the Pan-Galactic Treaty underwent its first major revision in 1,000 years. Driven by the unified demands of the Oral Concord, the Thren Compact, and the Solarian Vanguard, a new absolute mandate was ratified. It stated that all sentient miners, of any species, were universally inviolable under any scientific, political, or legal exception. The Ilir incident became the bedrock of galactic child protection laws. Back on the colony of Stavehold, the ambient temperature of the administrative offices was still a crisp 20 degrees. Tamsin Vale stood in her quarters, watching the pale light of the local star filter through the window. Juniper walked into the room. She was wearing her favorite oversized sweater. She climbed onto the window seat and carefully placed a small, glowing yellow model of a fractal spiral on the sill. It was a perfect replica of the glyph she had drawn in the medical ward, a quiet monument to the song they had sung in the dark. Juniper rested her chin on her knees, watching the transport ships ascend into the sky. "Mom," Juniper asked, her voice soft, retaining the quiet strength she had forged in the deep. "Do you think there are still good aliens out there?" Tamsin walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, thinking of an ancient ambassador whose robes glowed with the light of a dying star. "Yes," Tamsin answered smoothly, looking out at the endless expanse of the universe. "Because they also said the Oryx were mad." Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let me know your city or country, and share your thoughts on Tamsin and Juniper's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to the Sci-Fi Stories channel, hit that like button, and give the video a boost by pressing the hype button so more people can discover and listen to this adventure.